Mile High, it's great to be back here, and those of you who are tuning in from around the world, welcome to Mile High Church. It's a joy to share some thoughts with you, and I'm just so impressed with all that Mile High Church is doing to overcome our social distancing and to be very near and very powerful, and so thank you, Dr. Michelle, Reverend Josh, the whole staff, the team, the music, the tech, and the facilities, and everybody who comes together to make this still the spiritual beacon that it truly is. I thought last Sunday's Easter service was fantastic. I loved it. Not sure how you got the whole choir to sing together at different places, but it was marvelous. And the message, Josh, was especially superb. And we're so blessed to have such great leadership here at Mile High Church. Well, let's see. They asked me to share a few thoughts, and of course that's not really possible. The few part is what kind of gets in my way. And I often like to start with a little humor, but I looked around for some quarantine humor, and boy, I couldn't find much, just an inside joke here or there. All right, well now, that's about as good as we can do. So my message title for today is Reclaiming Your Power Zone. Now, it seems to me that we all desire to have a sense of reliable personal power in our lives. The problem is that most people find that their sense of power is fleeting, it's weak, and perhaps even undependable at times. And this is often because people ground their sense of power in accomplishments, in money, things, status, or they base their sense of personal power on dominating and controlling people or situations in life. And the thing about that kind of power, those aspects of power, is that they are ego-oriented and they are outwardly based. And so they're inherently fragile. And they're apt to desert us when we need them the very most. And then something like this pandemic comes along. And for many people, their sense of personal power is not at all fragile. It's absent. It's absent, and that can make this an extremely frightening time. But what if, in times like these, there are actually some very powerful opportunities? Chief among them is the opportunity to realize something greater within ourselves. You see, today I want you to sense and know that there's a zone in you, a vortex of authentic and limitless power. There is that zone. Now, this isn't power over anything or anyone. This is power within. It is power within you, and it is also power that is within any situation, however complicated it may seem to be. Here's the thing. The world is never going to give you power, true power. You'll never find that in the world. But here's the good news. When you find true power, the world can't take it away from you. So today, I invite us to explore the zone of power within us and how we can stand in that place if we know how to do that. Now, so here we are in quarantining and social distancing. It's a bizarre experience to stand in this gorgeous sanctuary and have just a sprinkling of the key people here. And yet I feel your presence. So here we are quarantined, and it's an amazing experience. And yet what I've been amazed by is the upsurgence of a phenomenon during these times. Zoom and things like it. It's amazing. Zoom is an intentional and dynamic connection. So even though we are spread apart and can't be with some that we desire, we have come up with this amazing technology for an intentional and dynamic connection nonetheless. And many businesses and organizations are using it to continue to communicate, to continue to move forward. Mile High Church here, I'm somewhat in the loop here, and Mile High Church has dozens and dozens of Zoom meetings each and every week. Everybody zooming in from their homes. In the Teel home, we're using it to keep in touch with family and friends, and especially our grandchildren. In fact, most nights of the week, we have a bedtime Zoom story with our two youngest grandkids. And I love it. And it feels so good. So here we are in the necessity of being restricted in terms of our closeness. And yet we have found a way to still have a sense of intimacy and togetherness, a sense of presence. And that's such a very beautiful thing. So it got me to thinking, what if we also had inner Zoom meetings? What if we had inner Zoom meetings? And we decided that at an inward level, we are also going to empower this intentional and dynamic connection inwardly. Oh, I tell you what that could do for us is it could put us in deeper touch with the higher realities of this life and the higher realities within us. It could take us back into our inherent God-given power zone. So what I want to leave you with today is I invite you to explore having 3 inner Zoom meetings on a regular basis. 3 inner Zoom meetings so that you can zoom into your zone, as it were. And the first inner Zoom meeting is Zoom with your source. Intentionally, dynamically, moving inwardly to have a connection with your source and all that that can mean. In some respects, as I was contemplating this, I realized that's prayer. Prayer is the ultimate inner Zoom call in some respects. We have this opportunity to shift our focus from the problems and the situations and our concerns and our questions. And while holding those as we must, we also focus on something greater. And we can connect with that something greater within ourselves. And it's very important for our empowerment. I want to share with you a time for me. It was toward the end of my second year in the ministry. And I'll just be quite frank with you, I really had to hit a rough patch, a down patch. I'd been working really, really hard, and in some respects, I probably was working too hard. I was frustrated because I wanted more results, and in all of that, I was getting down on myself. And it was a very painful time for me, a time of wondering, am I doing the right thing I should be doing with my life? So thank God there was a retired minister I've spoken of often who lived in the area, Dr. Ezra Ellis, Ez, as I called him. So I made an appointment with Ez, and I drove out to his house, and I shared with him, after a few pleasantries, I said, hey, Ez, I'm down. And I really don't know if I've got what it takes to do this over the long haul. And that man who just exuded compassion, he just had me sit down in his study, and we chatted just a little bit. But then he said, Raj, I'd like us to do an experience together. I'd like to lead you through this. And I said, go for it. And so the first thing he did, and by the way, you might want to do these things right now with me. You can do that. It won't be all that long, but it might be powerful. So he said, first of all, Raj, close your eyes. And don't just shut out the light. Close your eyes as a symbol of moving your focus inward. You can come back to your challenges and the world's problems, but focus inward. Go within. Go to the center of awareness, for that's who you really are. So I closed my eyes. Maybe you're doing that now too. And then Ez said, let's do some breathing together. And he said, Raj, breathe in through your nostrils, a full breath, and then breathe out of your mouth as though you're breathing through a straw. Let's do that together a second time. Deep breath through the nostrils. Breathing out is through a straw. One more time. Breathing in. And already, as he led me through that, I remember feeling a deepening, an even greater stilling within me. And then as said, now, Roger, keep releasing. But here's what I want. I invite you to feel like you're being held. You're being held by this greater power, this love in this universe. And he said to me, he reminded me, you didn't create yourself, Roger. Something did. An intelligence, a power, a love. You don't even breathe yourself. You're part of this. So in this moment, feel held. And I did. And that's when some tears welled up for me. Because we sometimes go through this life unnecessarily feeling so alone. And we're not. And then as he gave me a few minutes to just feel that exquisite feeling of being held by a love, by an intelligence, more than words can say, he then said, I'm going to share with you a passage that I cherish. He said, let these words sink in deep. Have you not realized? Have you not heard that the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth, faints not, neither is weary. He gives power to the faint and to them that have no might. He increases their strength. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And he paused. And then I remember him saying the last part of that again. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. And they shall walk and not faint. And he let it go silent for a moment. And then he simply said, receive that, Roger, receive. And you know what? I felt an inpouring or an upwelling of something. That's something that says, it's going to be all right. You've got what it takes. This too shall pass. And after a little bit of this receiving time, he then said, all right, Roger, I want you to imagine that your spirit is freed from its former cage, and it is like an eagle. Imagine that your spirit is like that eagle, soaring with great majesty and power. And after I did that for, I don't even know, I'd lost track of time, he then brought me in for a landing, and he had me open my eyes. I was in a whole different space. I hope you are too. And he said, do you know where those words came from? And I said, well, I think the book of Isaiah. And he was pleased that I knew that much. He said, yeah, Isaiah 40:31. He said, now I want you to keep repeating those words and do things like we just did. That's your strength. And I went home and I wrote all that down, and I practiced that week in and week out for a long time. And you know, I remember that chapter of self-doubt. I felt it close. And I knew that life was carrying me on. So as we have this inner Zoom meeting with Source, it's not about forcing anything, and it's not an intellectual activity. It's an opening, it's a yielding, it's moving the frequency of our being into the larger reality and the light and the frequency of the divine, of love. And there's an automatic empowerment. It's not like we got to make it look like we're powerful and put on any airs around that. There's an automatic empowerment when we know that truth, that we are one in and of and with the one. Our beloved founder, Ernest Holmes, he wrote, "The secret of spiritual power is a consciousness of one's union with the whole and the availability of unlimited good." At times we have to zoom back into that awareness, I believe. And one of my favorite passages from the Bible is, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That's who you are. Your power, your love, your soundness and creativity of mind. So yeah, I invite you to have some inner Zoom meetings and then follow that up after you've Zoomed with your source with an inner Zoom meeting with your heart. What happens in times that are critical, unprecedented, unexpected, is that in our fear and uncertainty, we can close our hearts. And that's one of the most challenging things we do, because the heart is the portal to power, you see. And so we actually cut ourselves off from that power zone that is most essential for us. And so it's so important to kind of like have that inner Zoom, that intentional and dynamic connection with that great portal within us into power, to love, to potential. That's our heart, to relax and to open our hearts and to feel that welling up of that infinite love that we're a part of. And it's like we get something back. We get our energy, our zest, our power back. I've loved something that I've had in my files for a long time, written by Shelley Mickle. I want to share this with you. I love this. In 1958, when I was in 5th grade, everybody in my little cotton town in Arkansas thought my cousin Ted was going to die of a heartache. He had been engaged to a girl for 2 years, and right before the wedding, she gave back the engagement ring and called the whole thing off. Ted wouldn't get out of bed. He wouldn't eat. He put his 56 Chevy up on blocks in his front yard, and he took off the wheels. But worse was the engagement ring, which sat in the front window of the jewelry store on Main Street with a sign that said, "Resale on consignment." Nobody wanted that ring. It had become a symbol of love gone bad. My family thought there was only one chance for Ted. We sent word to my Auntie Lucille to make her famous rascal soup. Rascal soup. Aunt Lucille swore that no matter what your problem was, her soup was guaranteed to reawaken the rascal in you. And so she'd bring a jar of her soup to anybody's house for whatever reason. Flu, bad grades, bankruptcy, a tax audit, a death in the family. When I had been down and out with the measles in 2nd grade, she brought me a bottle of her soup. It had vegetables floating in chicken broth, surrounded by noodles shaped into the letters of my first name. Maybe the magic of her soup came from how long you spent fishing those noodles out that spelled your name, and then the long while you took carefully moving those letters on your spoon into your mouth. Because by the time you finished that soup, you had plenty of time to slowly reassess who you really were. Anyhow, that soup didn't make you feel stronger, and usually the next day you're going about the world with a renewed rascally spunk. So on Valentine's Day in 1958, Aunt Lucille delivered her soup to my cousin Ted. After a whole day of eating T-E-D, and Aunt Lucille's delicious soup, Cousin Ted got up, went down to that jewelry store, took that ring out of the window, and started wearing it himself. He put the wheels back on his car, and he drove over to the next town, where he finally lost that ring in a poker game. And then, on his way home, he stopped by a roadside cafe and met his current wife. Now, I'm not saying that soup performed miracles, but my cousin Ted and his wife Betty Ann have been married for 40 years. To me, the miracle, yeah, maybe the soup, but the miracle, it's a miracle of heart. It's the opening up of compassion for ourselves, how life can be difficult, unpredictable. And yet we come back through our hearts to who we really are, and we discover that we can hold ourselves in compassion, which then equips us to hold others in compassion. And oh, isn't that needed right now? Compassion for those on the front lines of this pandemic, the medical people, the first responders, the delivery people, all of those kinds of people. And those who are struggling, perhaps afflicted, have had losses. As we zoom with our hearts, we have that intentional and dynamic connection with what really matters. We also discover the kind of compassion that allows us to hold both sadness and joy in the same way. It's not either or. It's like we still have a heart of compassion, and we still know that life is good and that we have light to shine, and it shines primarily through our hearts. How about a Zoom meeting with your heart on a regular basis? And then follow that up with an inner Zoom meeting with your possibilities. Sometimes we let our sense of options and dreams and vision shrink at times like this. And yet possibility still exists. And one thing about the heart, and the heart math people have been talking a lot about this in recent years, is the heart is the portal to what quantum physics calls the field of infinite potentiality. So there's a part of us that melds into the dimension where everything is possible. Not everything has unfolded into form and experience, but everything is held as a possibility. All that ever shall be is held as a possibility in this field. And your heart puts you into that field. So how about zooming with the part of you that participates in an infinite possibility and begin to open to that? Again, you may not know the specifics, but you can open to that sense of ever unfolding possibility. This past February, Erica and I, along with my colleague Howard Caesar and his wife Diane, we took a group of about 50 people on a pilgrimage to Egypt. I'll always remember the day we spent in the Valley of the Kings, which is where they discovered all those tombs. And we went into 3 of them, and spectacular carvings on the wall and various things. And then we saw and we passed King Tut's tomb, perhaps the most famous of them. And I recalled the story of archaeologist Howard Carter, who discovered that tomb, one of the rare tombs that had everything in it intact, had not been looted at all. He discovered it in 1922. He knew previously that tomb probably existed, and he got a bunch of backers. He was so zealous, a bunch of backers to fund this effort. And so he got the money, and he went over and he dug and he dug and he dug, and week after week after week passed. And as time went on, more and more of these backers pulled out until there was only one of them left. And he too contacted Carter and said, "I'm done. There's going to be no money. However, I will fund this final week of digging." So they continued to dig. And just before the last day, he and his team discovered the entrance into that tomb. And it says that he opened up a tiny hole in the stone doorway into that tomb. And he peered in. There wasn't much light, but he peered in. And he could tell it was all there. And then he sealed up that door, and he rushed into town to send a message to that single lone backer that remained, that he had found the discovery. And after he had sent the message, the telegraph operator said, "Well, what did you see?" And almost in a trance, Carter said some very famous words. He said, "I see great and wonderful things that I haven't even discovered yet. I see great and wonderful things that I haven't even discovered yet." And when we do an inner zoom with possibility, we sense that there are great and wonderful things that are available for us, that the universe wants to pour forth in and through us. We sense that. We may not know all about them and all that they hold, but we sense that energy of possibility that wants to flow by means of us. I love it in the Bible when God says to Jeremiah, he says, "I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope and a future." That is exactly the very same proclamation at the heart of you and me. The divine saying, "I've got plans. bigger than you know. Keep your consciousness open and receive them. So I invite you in these weeks, have some quiet time with yourself, and I invite you to have some inner Zoom meetings. Zoom inwardly, with that same purpose of creating an intentional and dynamic connection with the highest about life and about you. You'll find it's important. Zoom with your source. Zoom with your heart. Zoom with your possibilities. And of course, I had to have an acronym for Zoom, and I think it's Zone of Original Magnificence. And when you zoom in these ways, you find yourself right there in the zone of original magnificence, and that is the power zone you can reclaim. Remember, God has not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind.